They called him useless. She called him family. The universe called him unstoppable. Before we start the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Readers from over 40 countries follow DracoWar. Are you one of them? The planet Vorith smelled like iron and rain. That was the first thing Dr. Mara Voss noticed when she stepped off the resettlement shuttle, her boots sinking into the dark soil of a world that had never been meant for humans. The Galactic Settlement Bureau had given her people 3 choices after Earth's northern hemisphere went dark: refugee camps on Telos Prime, labor contracts on the mining rings of Durkin, or voluntary relocation to Vorith, a frontier planet with breathable air, hostile terrain, and no existing government. Most humans picked the camps. Mara picked Vorith. She was 53 years old, had spent 30 years as a xenobiologist, and had watched 3 colleagues die on planets far worse than this one. She did not frighten easily. What she did do, what she had always done, was notice things other people ignored. That was how she found him. It was her 4th morning on Vorith. She was cataloging fungal growth along the eastern ridge when she heard the sound. Not a cry, not a roar, but something smaller. A scraping. A wheeze. She pushed through a curtain of black fern and found the creature wedged between 2 boulders, its wing membrane torn, its scales dull as ash. A dragon. Not the kind from old Earth stories. Vorith dragons were real, catalogued, and deeply respected by every spacefaring civilization in the known galaxy. They were creatures of extraordinary intelligence, capable of bonding with sentient beings across species lines, their biology laced with an energy-conducting organ called the Veth core that allowed them to channel electromagnetic fields into focused bursts of force. A healthy adult could disable a warship. A bonded pair, dragon and partner, was considered among the most formidable units in any military or diplomatic corps. This one was neither healthy nor formidable. He was small, far smaller than any adult she had seen in the Bureau's files. His body was the length of a ground transport, but his frame was narrow, his limbs underdeveloped. One of his rear legs bent at the wrong angle. His Veth core, visible through the translucent patch of scales behind his left shoulder, pulsed an irregular gray instead of the deep gold that marked a healthy specimen. She checked her scanner. 18 months old. A juvenile. His genetic markers flagged immediately: a rare developmental condition called Veth stasis, a failure of the energy organ to properly mature. Every Vorith settlement guide listed the condition clearly. Dragons born with Veth stasis were abandoned by their clutch families within the first year. They could not bond. They could not channel. They were, by every measure the galaxy used to assign value, useless. Mara put her scanner away. She had never trusted the galaxy's measures. She set her camp beside the boulders that night. She brought clean water from her pack and held it near his snout until he drank. He watched her with eyes the color of deep ocean, green shot through with silver, and he did not move away. She talked to him while she worked, the way she had always talked to frightened animals, to dying colleagues, to herself in the long dark hours of grief. She told him her name. She told him about Earth. She told him that useless was a word invented by people too lazy to look closer. By morning he had moved closer to her fire. She named him Ren. The human settlement of Vorith Base 7 grew slowly, the way things grow when they have no choice but to persist. By the time Ren was 3 years old, he was a fixture of camp life, too large to ignore, too gentle to fear, and too strange to categorize. He could not channel energy. His Veth core still pulsed that dull arrhythmic gray. But he was intelligent in ways that surprised even Mara. He learned human speech patterns within 8 months, not by mimicking sound but by observing context, watching faces, tracking cause and effect, building meaning from pattern. He could not speak in the human sense, but he communicated through a combination of low-frequency vibration and precise physical gesture that Mara eventually mapped into a working vocabulary of over 400 concepts. He also had a memory that bordered on the extraordinary. Mara first noticed it during a supply crisis in the settlement's 2nd year. A fungal blight had wiped out 40% of their stored grain. The settlement council was debating ration cuts when Ren pressed his snout to Mara's shoulder and began a deliberate sequence of gestures. Northeast, 3 ridges, water, deep, root, safe. It took her 2 hours to convince the council to send a scouting party. It took the scouts 4 hours to return with samples of a dense, starchy root vegetable growing in an underground water system that none of their surveys had flagged. Ren had observed the blight beginning 6 days before the council noticed it. He had spent those 6 days mentally mapping every food source he had ever seen on his exploratory walks with Mara, cross-referencing what could survive the blight's conditions, and identifying the solution before the problem was formally declared. The council called it luck. Mara called it Ren. He saved the settlement twice more in the following year, once by detecting a structural fault in the water reclamation tower before it failed, and once by positioning himself between a territorial pack of Vorath ridge cats and a group of children who had wandered beyond the perimeter fence. He did not attack the ridge cats. He simply stood, his broken body as wide and still as a wall, his ocean-green eyes steady, and the ridge cats, creatures that feared nothing on Vorath, turned and left. Word spread the way word spreads in small, frightened communities, with gratitude and with complicated feelings. Some people loved Ren. Many were grateful. A few were deeply uncomfortable, not with what he was but with what he implied. If a broken dragon could do this much, what did that say about every broken thing they had dismissed? The discomfort reached its peak when the Bureau's regional inspector arrived for the settlement's third-year evaluation. Inspector Gorath was Velhari, a tall, six-limbed species with a bureaucratic culture so old it had calcified into something resembling religion. He arrived with 2 assistants, a data pad thick with regulations, and an immediate, visible reaction to Ren. This animal is registered as Vethstasis class, Gorath said, consulting his pad. Non-viable. What is it doing in a residential settlement zone? Living, Mara said. Gorath looked at her the way bureaucrats look at people who answer simple questions with complicated ones. Dr. Voss, under Bureau Regulation 7 Alpha, non-viable fauna integrated into settlement zones must be removed to prevent resource competition and liability. He has saved this settlement 3 times, Mara said. I have documentation. Non-viable fauna cannot be credited with. Inspector. Her voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that had weight. I have been a xenobiologist for 30 years. I have studied 47 species on 19 planets. I am telling you that this dragon has a form of intelligence and perceptual ability that your regulations have no category for, because your regulations were written by people who decided what was valuable before they understood what was possible. I am asking you to look at my documentation before you make a decision that this settlement will not survive. Gorath looked at his data pad for a long moment. Then he looked at Ren. Ren looked back with those deep ocean eyes, calm and patient and entirely without apology for existing. The inspector reviewed the documentation. He left without issuing a removal order, which was as close to conceding the point as Velhari bureaucrats ever came. But the encounter left a mark. Because Gorath filed a report. And reports had a way of traveling to places with larger agendas. The Durathi arrived in the 4th year. They were not a species given to announcement. The first sign was a signal disruption that knocked out Vorath Base 7's long-range communication for 6 hours. The second sign was a shadow, a Durathi harvester ship moving low over the eastern ridge, its scanning arrays sweeping the terrain in a pattern Mara recognized from her research files as resource extraction survey mode. The Durathi were not at war with humanity. They were something more precise and more dangerous. They were indifferent to humanity. They were a civilization that operated by a simple principle. Any planet not defended by a recognized military force was legally classified as unclaimed resource territory under Galactic Compact law. Vorath had no military presence. Vorath Base 7 had no defense treaty. And Vorath, it turned out, sat directly above one of the largest deposits of Varith crystal in the sector, a mineral essential for faster-than-light drive construction and worth more than every human settlement in the quadrant combined. The Durathi harvester made 3 passes. Then it landed. Their lead negotiator was a creature named Executor Brass, a title, not a name, because the Durathi did not use personal names in official contexts. Executor Brass was pragmatic in the way of all creatures who have never had to fight for anything they wanted. He presented the settlement council with a formal notice. Durathi extraction claim 7 Vorath. The settlement had 30 days to vacate. Transportation to Bureau refugee camps would be provided as a courtesy. Resistance would be classified as illegal interference with a compact registered extraction claim. The council met for 11 hours. The arguments were not about whether to fight. They had nothing to fight with. The arguments were about whether to leave immediately or spend the 30 days trying to contact the Bureau for intervention, knowing that Bureau response time in the outer settlements averaged 4 to 6 months. Mara did not attend the council meeting. She was in the eastern hangar with Ren. She had been studying his Veth core for 4 years. She understood now what the Bureau's diagnostics had missed, what every standard xenobiological model had gotten wrong about Veth stasis. The condition was not a failure of the energy organ. It was a difference in its frequency. A healthy dragon's Veth core operated on a narrow, standardized band, powerful, predictable, militarily useful. Ren's Veth core operated on a band so broad and so low that standard scanners simply could not resolve it into a readable output. It had registered as inactive because the instruments were calibrated for something else entirely. It was not inactive. It was listening. Mara had spent 4 years learning what it was listening to. The answer, which she had confirmed 3 weeks before the Durathi arrived with a combination of repurposed medical equipment, settlement power conduits, and 40 pages of calculations she had checked 17 times, was this. Ren's Veth core was continuously receiving and processing the electromagnetic signature of every piece of technology within a 6-kilometer radius. He was not a weapon. He was not a sensor array. He was something the galaxy had no word for yet, a living intelligence that perceived technology the way a musician perceives sound, in full, simultaneous, harmonic depth. He could not destroy a warship. But he could read one. And if he could read one, Mara had come to believe he could find its pattern, its rhythm, its necessary frequency. The precise electromagnetic note that, interrupted correctly, would render its systems inoperable. She had 30 days to find out if she was right. On the 29th day, Mara walked into the Durathi harvester's command radius alone. She carried no weapon. She carried a modified transmitter the size of her palm, built from components she and Ren had spent 28 days assembling, calibrating, and testing on progressively larger systems. First the settlement's water reclamation tower, then its power grid, then the long-range communication array. Each test had worked. Each test had been more precise than the last. Ren had guided every calibration with a patience and focus that made Mara think of surgeons, of musicians, of anyone who understood that the most powerful interventions were the quietest ones. The transmitter would broadcast a targeted electromagnetic pulse on the exact frequency Ren had identified as the Durathi harvester's core operating band. Not a destructive pulse. The harvester was too large and too well shielded for destruction. But a disruption. A sustained, precisely tuned disruption that would force the ship's systems into emergency diagnostic mode, locking out all non-essential functions, including the extraction arrays, the navigation system, and the long-range communication relays, for a period Mara calculated at between 6 and 9 hours. 6 to 9 hours was enough time for the settlement's own long-range signal, which she had pre-recorded and pre-positioned, to reach the 3 nearest Bureau monitoring stations simultaneously. The signal was not a distress call. Distress calls triggered standard response protocols with 4 to 6 month timelines. The signal Mara had recorded was a compact violation report, specifically, a claim that the Durathi Extraction Claim 7 Vorath had been filed in bad faith because the planet contained an unregistered, non-catalogued species of sufficient intelligence to qualify Vorath for protected biosphere status under Compact Article 12. The species she had documented was Ren. 4 years of behavioral observation. 4 years of vocabulary mapping, problem-solving records, crisis response documentation, and perceptual ability analysis. 47 filed reports that the Bureau had acknowledged, logged, and done nothing with, until now, when they would arrive simultaneously at 3 monitoring stations alongside a compact violation flag that required mandatory response within 72 hours. Mara had not lied in a single document. She had simply ensured that the truth arrived at the right moment, in the right format, to the right people. She stood 50 meters from the harvester's landing struts and activated the transmitter. The ship went quiet in 11 seconds. She stood in the silence of it and breathed the iron and rain air of Vorath and did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and certain and grateful, for the 30 years that had taught her how to look at broken things without flinching, for the 4 years that had taught her what Ren was, and for the simple, stubborn human refusal to accept that the world was only what other people said it was. Behind her, at the edge of the settlement perimeter, Ren watched. His Veth core pulsed, slowly, steadily, in a rhythm she had come to recognize over 4 years of early mornings and careful observation. It was the rhythm he used when he was content. When he was, in whatever way a dragon experienced such things, at peace. The Bureau response ships arrived in 61 hours. Ahead of schedule. The protected biosphere designation for Vorath was processed in 9 weeks, the fastest Article 12 ruling in Bureau history, which the Bureau's press office attributed to procedural efficiency and which everyone in Vorath Base 7 attributed to the fact that Mara's documentation was so thorough, so precise, and so impossible to dismiss that the reviewing committee had simply run out of ways to delay. The Durathi extraction claim was voided. Executor Brass filed a formal protest that was reviewed, considered, and archived. The Vareth crystal deposits remained beneath the soil of Vorath, untouched. The settlement grew. In the years that followed, 3 more human communities established themselves on Vorath, drawn by the protected status and by something harder to quantify, a story that had spread through the outer settlement networks the way honest stories do, quietly and persistently, finding the people who needed to hear it. The story of a xenobiologist who had kept a dragon no one wanted. The story of a dragon who had turned out to be the most perceptive mind in the sector. The story of what happened when a human being decided that value was not something assigned by institutions but something discovered by people willing to pay attention. Ren's case was studied at 6 xenobiological institutions. The condition previously classified as Veth stasis was reclassified as broad-spectrum Veth resonance, a different developmental pathway, not a failed one. 3 other dragons with the same condition were subsequently identified on Vorith and 2 neighboring systems. None of them were abandoned. All of them were given time and careful observation and the basic dignity of not being decided about before they were understood. Mara was offered a position at the Bureau's Xenobiological Research Division on Telos Prime. She declined. She was 62 years old and she had work to do on Vorith. Ren was 6 years old, still young by dragon standards, still growing in ways that surprised her regularly. His Veth core now pulsed a color that had no exact name in any human language, something between gold and gray, a frequency no instrument had ever been designed to measure because no instrument had ever been built with him in mind. He spent his mornings walking the ridges with Mara, his afternoons in patient conversation with the settlement's children, who had grown up treating him as simply and completely what he was. Their friend, their neighbor, the large and quiet presence at the edge of every significant moment in their lives. On the day the Bureau formally unveiled the Vorith Protected Biosphere marker, a simple stone pillar at the settlement's eastern gate, inscribed with the date and the legal designation, Mara stood beside it and put her hand on Ren's jaw, the way she had on that first morning beside the boulders when he had been small and broken, and watching her with ocean-green eyes that already held more than anyone had thought to look for. He pressed his head against her shoulder. The gesture meant, in the vocabulary they had built together over 6 years, "I am here. I am glad." She had no words that covered what she felt in return. She used the ones she had. "So am I," she said. "So am I." The iron and rain air moved across the ridge. The settlement hummed with the ordinary sounds of people living their lives on a world they had chosen, in a universe that had tried to take it from them and had not succeeded. Above the eastern ridge, a pair of Vorith ridge cats crossed the skyline in the long gold light of late afternoon, moving without hurry through a world that was exactly as wild and exactly as survivable as it had always been. Ren watched them go. His Veth core pulsed its nameless color, slow and steady and full. The universe, which keeps its own records in its own way, noted the moment, filed it, remembered it, as it remembers all the things that were called useless and proved otherwise, as it always has. And if this story moved you, you already know why DracoWar exists. Every story here is for the ones who were told they weren't enough, and kept going anyway. Share this with someone who needs it today.